This podcast is sponsored by CSMI, the maker of the HUMAC Norm Isokinetics system. Purchase a new or refurbished machine, or you can even upgrade an existing system to bring it up to date with all the latest testing and training applications. Please visit csmisolutions.com to view all of their available products, including the HUMAC Norm Isokinetics system, the HUMAC Balance portable computerized balance system, and Sportswear Online. CSMI. Better data leads to better results.
Hello, and welcome to the Everything PT podcast with Matt Taylor and Daniel Bodkin. Please do not consider anything you hear to be medical advice. Just a couple of guys ranting about everything PT. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to episode 8 of the Everything PT podcast. My name is Daniel Bodkin. I'm joined by my co-host, Matthew Taylor. Everything PT podcast is brought to you by CSMI, the maker of the HUMAC Norm Isokinetics system, which can be found at csmisolutions.com.
We are also sponsored by Blazepods too. So you can find them at blazepod.com. They're just awesome things from working patients with balance to right after ACL return to sports stuff, or any and everything in between too. We got a funny story with our guest about Blazepods too coming up, but yeah, we have a very special guest, the famous George Davies. George, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing just great. And the reason I'm so famous is I've just made more mistakes longer than both of you guys combined.
That's awesome. George, I was doing some homework on you, reading your just the list of your curriculum vitae, your resume. I've been doing physical therapy, correct me if I'm wrong, since 1975. Is that right?
That is correct.
So about 45, 47 years, something like that. So been at it a long time. You're a professor at Georgia. You correct me if I'm wrong anytime. Professor at Georgia Southern. Do you have the sports sports specialization, right? As
yes.
well,
yeah.
PT.
Mm-hmm.
I read that you have the 2 different personal training certifications, one from, is it ACE, and then one's through the National Strength Conditioning Association.
Yeah, the other one isn't from ACE. It's actually from NASM.
NASM,
the National,
okay.
National
Gotcha.
Academy of Sports Medicine. So,
and
yeah, I just wanted to expand my horizons and try to learn more. I mean, that's what makes the profession so exciting.
Now, Mr. Davies, looking through your long list of accomplishments over your career, and it's literally too much for us to even list right now. One thing stood out to me. I'm an Army veteran of the Field Artillery. I noticed you were a Marine.
Yes, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
53 years ago, I did a tour of duty in the Marine Corps. Absolutely.
You could tell me a little bit about how being a Marine and your experience in the service has helped shape your career.
I think the one probably single most important thing that going through 12 weeks on Paradise Island, Paris Island Marine Corps basic training in South Carolina, was basically it taught me a lot more about self-discipline and things that I could accomplish when I set my mind to it. Because since that time, I've had a few goals in the way of exercise. One was to run a marathon. Then, of course, once you do that, you want to run a sub 3-hour marathon. Of course, did that. Then I want to do a triathlon. So did a short triathlon. Then did the USTS length triathlon. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a Tin Man, but that's a half of an Ironman. So I had to do a Tin Man. Then, of course, well, got to do an Ironman. And interestingly, I failed on the first attempt because it was so hot and humid. And I had trained. I had done my training. I mean, I was pretty good on all the events. But when I got to the run, which was my forte, it was like over 100 degrees. And so I just bailed on that one. So went back the next year though and finished it. And I said, boy, martial arts looks like fun. So let's start that. So worked my way through and became a black belt and a sensei. So I've taught martial arts for years. So I've checked most of the boxes I've wanted from the standpoint of physical activity, physical fitness things. And a lot of that, Dan, came, as you know, from being in the Army as well. A lot of it comes from some of the, I'm going to say, the discipline that they instill in you. And it didn't matter in the Marine Corps, they instilled it into you whether you wanted it or not. So particularly during that time, I mean, that was during the Vietnam time, which was a horrible time in our lives. You guys have both seen the movie Forrest Gump. That's
Sure.
what it was like. When you got off the plane recently, wearing your uniform, you were a hero. When we got off the plane wearing our uniforms, we were baby killers, because some bad shit did go down over in Nam. I know that. And My Lai massacre and things of that nature. So it was just a horrible, horrible time. But nevertheless, I'm proud that I served. My father-in-law was a Marine. My brother was a Marine. My father was an Air Force guy. So I'm proud that I did serve.
And thank you again for your service. It's everything that your generation did made it much easier for my generation to go through. So thank you again.
We all shared in that, making that commitment. Interestingly, since 9/11, less than 1% of the population have ever served in the military. And I find it just interesting times. And I'm all for rights and privileges of everybody. But a lot of people are, I guess they're always complaining that they don't have this, they don't have that, they want this, they want that. And yet they've never paid their dues to really earn it. So, and I know I'm old school, but I paid my dues and I keep paying them every day. So, and I still work out regularly, by the way.
Oh, good.
Very regularly. My, the way I monitor that, when I graduated from Paris Island, basic training in the Marine Corps, I weighed 155 pounds. Today, 53 years later, I weigh 160 pounds. So I've gained that 5, which I'm working on every day.
That is impressive. You mentioned something about paying your dues. And I feel like with, physical therapy, but a lot of other professions, that's kind of part of it when you come out as a new grad. You kind of do have to pay your dues. And I feel like that's something that's being kind of lost with some of the younger therapists. They don't feel they need to pay those dues in order to work their way up.
Having been teaching now for, this is actually going on to the 48th year of teaching, because when I started, I actually did clinical practice and taught at the same time. So I've been actually teaching physical therapy for 48 years now. Goal is to hit 50, and then I'll see what I'm going to do. But nevertheless, there's a change. I mean, you guys know that, even from my generation to yours, but it's sort of the entitlement. And I don't mean to be sarcastic or facetious or anything like that, but it's somewhat the entitlement society nowadays. The kids, they play in the little league, baseball league. They end up last place and they all get their trophies. It's that type of thing. They're entitled because they tried. Well, we all want to try, but also I think we have to do sometimes, not just try. But you're right. I agree, Dan, that there's a whole different mindset. We used to do things, for example, at the university, we do we call it basically case management, where we do it like a pretend clinic to have the students in a very safe environment. So they're treating patients. And what they're doing is treating the other students. Well, it's interesting. We have the first year students in the case management class, and then we have the second year students volunteering as patients. Well, never had a problem. And I've been at Georgia Southern now 18 years. I was up in Wisconsin for 30. But now some of the second year students, I don't want to do that.
Wow.
Just like that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do it for the program. I don't want to do it to help the first year students and things like that. And it's just, it's a change, as you pointed out, Dan, there's changes that are going on in society as a whole as well. So, but
I don't know. Maybe it's just maybe it's the type of person. I don't know, but I feel like I have something to learn from everyone, especially someone that's seen as much as the field of physical therapy go through what it has as you have, George. Even from a guy like Daniel with Isokinetics, and George, you with your background and Isokinetics as well too. So I don't know, George, if you knew, Daniel actually teaches an isokinetic course for CSMI too.
I got that from the note that you had sent me. Because you had sent me a few ideas.
Oh, yes.
That was indicated. But, you know, the interesting thing, as you said, Matt, you want to learn from everybody.
Yeah.
One of the most important things I do in teaching is I learn from the students.
Mm-hmm.
And as you guys know, the best teacher you're ever going to have is every single patient that you have.
Sure.
Every single patient that you touch, you interact with, therapeutic alliance, that you develop your rapport with them. That's the single best teaching that you'll ever experience. And that's frankly why I've stayed in education for so long. I am so motivated to keep learning from not only my patients, because I still see patients all the time, but also learning from the students. Because, you know, one of the things I do, which I think is kind of cool, it's way past your era, but there was a series of books called The 1 Minute Manager. And they basically were ways that you could basically provide leadership in a very short, succinct period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I do with the students is at the end of different classes, I do a 1 minute, or I do actually a 5 minute, 1 minute of each question. What did you think was the best thing you learned today? What was the most confusing thing that you don't feel you learned today? Did you prepare for class adequately as you were supposed to based on what I had recommended you read? So I ask them a series of questions. But when I look at the answers, that tells me how good of a job I'm also doing. So I learn from the students every day. And obviously my teaching changes regularly based on the feedback that I get. So it's a two-way street. It's a two-way street, Matt, as you just mentioned. That, man, I'm just so fired up for, I mean, I still take courses, I still teach, I still do research, publish, but it's exciting to me.
I can tell.
I know a lot of people are down on the profession, but man, I'm as high on our profession as I've ever been.
That's really great to hear. So George, I had the pleasure of meeting you at CSM events, and I know that you teach. I know that you're in the clinic. I know you're doing research because I sat in on a couple. I don't know how many times you lectured, and there, well, I'm at four times or something, three or four times.
At CSM, we had 4 presentations.
Yeah. Are there any signs of slowing down? You mentioned the number 50, trying to get to 50 years. So any thoughts of that?
No, I mean, when I hit that, that's my goal, to hit that. And I'm in mid-70s, take no meds, none, which is incredible for almost anybody. As I said, within a few pounds of my fighting weight, so to speak. I used to do a lot of, I never did a lot of full contact. We did full contact in sparring in the dojo and everything, because you had to earn your belts. But then a lot of guys competed full contact. I didn't. It took me too many years to get something up here. And I said, I'm not going to let some yo-yo knock it out. What I did do, though, was a lot of point fighting. And boy, is that fun. It's almost like a fast game of tag. And so the point, the reason I mentioned that again is that I still work out pretty regularly. I mean,
good.
In the summers, I have a little more time because I have a teacher's contract, and probably 2 to 3 days a week in the summers, I do a mini triathlon, 3 workouts.
Wow, that's awesome.
That is impressive.
I still do circuit weight training as well, but cardio, you know, I tell everybody you can live without big bulging muscles, but you can't live without a healthy heart.
That's good
So
perspective.
number 1 priority is, to me, is always cardio. So that's my priority. So you know, something else of interest, I'm also a cancer survivor, which most people don't know. And interestingly, I had a lot of metastases. So I ended up having to have a lot of external beam radiation. So I'm actually and Matt, you couldn't have even known it when you saw me at CSM. I'm actually a bilateral total hip,
Oh, gosh.
but I can't run anymore. But what I do is elliptigo. Are you guys
Yeah.
familiar with that?
Oh, yeah.
So, I've been through 3 of them now. I have one in Wisconsin. I have one down here in Savannah. So I just changed the tires out. I've gone through about 6 sets of tires now. But I elliptigo, and then I live in a little community that has a small little swimming pool for the community, and it's too small with the kids and all that. So what I do is I tether swim. So I just hook myself up, a belt around my waist. I get over in the corner, and everybody knows me, so they just leave me alone. I just tether swim. When I go back to Wisconsin in summers, I swim at the Y 3 mile 3 days a week. And then biking takes too long. I don't like that as much. It just takes too long. So, but,
George, can you explain tether swimming to me? I have never heard of this.
Just put a waist belt on, and then take TheraBand and hook it to the step. So you just basically swim in place.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Simple enough.
So
Don't buy the endless pool. Buy
you can do that too.
TheraBand.
Hell, you buy a $20 little swim belt, and you're set to go, man. So yeah. But I have a unique situation because I have a teacher's contract. So when I'm in Georgia Southern, I teach full time. 2 afternoons a week, I'm in the clinic. Then probably 2 days a week, I'm also in the research lab. We're doing a lot of research with students and other projects, et cetera. But what's interesting is that's a 9-month teacher's contract. Summers, I go back to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where I was for 30 years. I have family there still, so I play grandpa. And then, but what I do is I work in the clinic part-time, and I only see patients and mentor the residents, because we actually started the first APTA credentialed sports PT residency. I think it's about 26, 27 years ago now. And every resident has passed their board certification exams.
Wow.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I was actually in La Crosse last fall. I installed a machine in Viroqua, Wisconsin.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Never heard of it, but I was very surprised at how awesome of a little town it was.
Oh yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
It's a college town. It was only like 50,000 people, but the university there, it's a D3, but they've been national NCAA national champs in football, in gymnastics, trivecta, cross country men, indoor track and field men, outdoor track and field, national champs, all 3 numerous times. Wow. They've got it's a factory. The kids who aren't quite good enough to go D1 go there. And so they're really, really competitive in sports. But the point I'm leading up to, Dan, it's interesting because, again, it's only 50,000 population, but you bring in 10 to 12,000 students. And La Crosse, Wisconsin is in the Guinness Book of World Records for more bars per capita per block than any other city. Second thing, they're in the Guinness Book of World Records, and I don't know if you saw it when you were there. They have the world's largest 6-pack. In other words, they have a brewery there, and it's made up with all the different silos where they ferment the beer. It's made up like a 6-pack. So they're the 2 claims to fame of La Crosse, Wisconsin. Wow. But it is a neat little city, and you saw the bluffs and the pools, and it's a pretty area, great to train. And in the summers, it's beautiful for training. Down here in Savannah, in the summers, it's so hot and humid, can't train well. So I just go back and forth.
Wow.
So
you mentioned research. You've done countless research projects. What are some of the questions you want to see answered, or what are some of the projects you're currently working on?
Interestingly, that Matt mentioned you're sponsored by Blazepods, because that's probably my main interest right now. Is, as you guys know, in the lower extremity, knees in particular, ACL and all that, the neuroplasticity and all this razzmatazz and all these things we're supposed to be doing. So we know that in the lower extremity. However, there was a really neat article by Webster and Hewitt, Tim Hewitt, probably one of the most prolific guys on the knee. And they did a meta-analysis of meta-analyses. You can imagine that. It's the highest metrics article published right now in the knee area. But the point I'm leading up to is what they found is we've been, and again, back in the mid 70s, I started rehabbing ACLs. We saw about 100 to 150 ACLs a year. I was there 30 years, do the math. But the point is that Webster and Hewitt's article indicated we've been rehabbing, we've been treating patients for 50 years with ACL injuries. There is still no consensus on what tests should be done. And secondly, there's no consensus, even if you use criterion-based information, that it's going to help prevent reoccurrence of an injury. And that segues back into one, the isokinetic thing. As you know, I've been a big believer in that. The first book I published, I think it was like 35 years ago on that thing, it was the first book on isokinetics ever. Interestingly, that went through 4 volumes before another book was ever published. Wow. And the next book that was published was by Davies over in Europe. But nevertheless, so I still, up in La Crosse, we actually have 2 biodexes. And we use one for rehab and we use one for testing, kind of save the one for testing. When I walk in the clinic, it's kind of a standing joke. Some of the PTAs or assistants or whatever, they run over and flip the biodex on, knowing that I'm going to be using that sucker all afternoon. But again, to me, that's one of the most important things that we need to do. And so many people are missing the boat. As you know, with the cost and all these different things, people complain that cost and blah, blah, blah. But again, everybody's using, one of the questions that I think Matt sent me was, well, if you don't have an isokinetic dynamometer, what do you do? Obviously, handheld dynamometry. That's the best thing you can do. And you can do cable tensiometers and various things. But knees, shoulders, I always use isokinetics. And then hip, I admit I do use handheld dynamometer. It's quicker. And for other than rotations, doing the other movements, I find handheld dynamometry is quicker in the clinic. So, but what everybody's still missing is we need to test that. We need to test dynamic strength. Even testing isometrically does not provide the same information as dynamic testing. Furthermore, as you well know, Dan, teaching it, I still think a lot of people are hung up on the limb symmetry thing. So you have a person who's here, they injure their right knee, it drops down. Well, during the disuse, the left knee or uninvolved side also drops. So you start up here, this drops down, this also drops, you rehab them, they're now symmetrical, but hell, they're still really below where they were or should be. And that's where you need to do the allometric scaling, which is just torques to body weights or, Newton meters to whatever. As well as you know, looking at the things of time rate of torque development or force development accuracy or force rate of force development, all those terms. I mean, we used to use TAE, TRTD, and all these old terms. But at any rate, they're the things that people are missing. And they're just limb symmetry. They're not even looking at unilateral ratios, let alone allometric scaling the body weight. But what I'm leading up to, Matt, your question and comment earlier, what's my main research right now? I frankly, after 30 to 40 years of doing research on the knee, I could care less. Everybody else is doing that. I mean, all you have to do is pick up AJSM and you got most of the articles are on the knee. International Journal of Sports PT, the last issue just came out. I think there's about 15 articles. I counted them. 10 of them, I think, are on the knee. So where my interest has gone in the last 5 years is really into, it's been a long time, actually 25 years was the first article I published, when upper extremity functional testing. We do isokinetics as part of the testing battery before we would ever do functional testing, just like in the lower extremity. Patients have to do the isokinetic testing before I'm going to do hop test, jump test, agility tests, whatever. Likewise, in the upper extremity, they have to have good dynamic strength before I'm going to start doing some of the functional testing. But when you look at all the functional testing in the upper extremity, and I have just recently reviewed the literature on that because I have a couple of talks coming up. I'm actually speaking at Andrews's football course the beginning of May. And I'm speaking at Dr. Frank Noyes' course up in Hilton Head at the end of May. And I have talks on both lower extremity functional testing, upper extremity functional testing. But what I'm leading up to is I've really reviewed the literature on upper extremity. I don't know if you guys read JOSPT, but they had the burn consensus that came out recently on the shoulder stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Every test, none of them do what the Blazepods do. So what we've been doing just recently, and we just had a Zoom call with the Blazepod honchos, because I work with a good biomechanist, Dr. Brian Riemann. He's a PhD, but he's also an ATC. So he came from a clinical background, and he teaches biostats. He's the biostats consultant for Journal of Athletic Training, biostats consultant for Journal of Strength and Conditioning and Research. So he complements me. Many times we'll do a research project and we work on it together and we get to the end. So he runs through the stats and comes up with the results and all. Turns out, okay, George, what's all this mean? So we really work well together. But so we actually met with the Blazepod guys recently and talked about it. So what we're doing right now, my main focus is every single test for the upper extremity is a proactive test. You know what you're going to do. You do a closed chain test side to side. You do a seated shot put. You do the Y balance test. You do a hop test. You do a test where you basically take a ball and you go up in the, I mean, every one is proactive. Well, sports isn't that way. When I actually do most of my talks now, what I do is I talk about, I say disclosure. We can never replicate in a clinical setting the reality of what happens in a on the sports field. And then what I do is I show one of those, what do they call them? The cams that they wear. GoPro, is it?
Yes.
The cam recorder.
Mm-hmm.
Show a GoPro cam recording of a guy during football. And all you see is like commotion going all over the place. But that's reality. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing now is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the closed kinetic chain upper extremity stability test. Basically, it's a push-up test where you just go back and forth like this. We actually developed that 30 years ago and published the first article for reliability. But that's still, the person knows what they're doing. Duh. So what we're doing now is we put the Blazepods in front. And we're doing basically where we do, I call it a single task response. So one light comes up open at a time. So the blue light, tap, 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 and they have to do that. We do it one arm, and then we can mix the arms. Then we do it with the multitask. We have all the Blazepods all light up at the same time as distractors, similar to the sports environment. So all the lights are lit up, and they have to make well, hell, where's the blue one? They got to distinguish not only the reaction to the colors, but they got to respond to the particular light they want. So we've done that for reliability, because that's the first thing you got to do. You got to start with reliability and validity, because what we're doing is comparing the Blazepod testing to the traditional CKC that we developed. Then we're also doing it open chain. So are you guys familiar with the ASH test? Ben Ashford is a physio in Australia, and they published this article. And they have a lot of patients in rugby that get instabilities in the shoulder. Well, they went back to all the game films, and they realized that the majority of times when the rugby players get injured, it's when the arms are in a long lever arm position in flexion, scaption, or abduction. So what he did, it's pretty clever. He had people lay down prone, and then he had a force plate, and he tested people in long lever arm positions. And he did that bilateral comparisons and looking at even whether they were in that position of kind of apprehension. Were they apprehensive about it, and did that affect their scores? So what we did is I took that concept and we put the Blazepod at the top for flexion, scaption, abduction, and then I think the 90-90 is also important. So we also added that. So we have Blazepods across the top, and then we have two at 90-90. And then we take the one arm, single task first, one blue light, boom, they have to do that. Then we do it with the other arms and look for bilateral comparison for limb symmetry. Then we do single arm with multiple lights. So you add the distractor, bilateral comparison. And then we put the single light on, but they've got to alternate the arms.
Okay.
And then we do all the lights, and they have to basically decide, not only are all the lights on, but they got to decide where the blue light is. So what we're
George,
doing,
real quick, is it speed that you're testing? Like how fast, and you're comparing side to side?
that's what the Blazepod apps
Okay.
collect, is the number of touches, the number of correct touches, and the reaction time. So we're just taking the information directly from the Blazepod app.
Awesome.
So what we're doing right now, the main thing I'm interested in is trying to take the upper extremity functional testing away from this clinic-based BS stuff that I've been doing and promoting for years to now more reality-based, where it's a lot of we're calling it neurocognitive reactive testing for reliability and validity for the closed chain using Blazepods, and then the neurocognitive reactive testing for the open kinetic chain using the Blazepods. So I'm trying to fill in the gaps from what you and I do all the time, Dan, is our isokinetic stuff. And that's important as one of the steps to go to the function, but we're missing the boat in the functional area, especially in the upper extremity. Not one study in the world's literature, because I'm looking at this, putting these talks together for Dr. Andrews and Dr. Frank Noyes. There's not one article in the world's literature that talks about a reactive upper extremity functional test that has, and again, you can just, Kevin Wilk does a lot of that stuff too, where he's doing that stuff all the time. But Kevin doesn't do the reliability or the validity research. He just does all the razzmatazz stuff. And Kevin and I are good friends. Hell, the first continuing ed course Kevin Wilk ever took was with me on isokinetics up in La Crosse, Wisconsin. But we're good friends. But what the point I'm making is Kevin is very creative. But again, and I've gone down and I've spent time with Kevin to learn from him as well. But I want to know, if I'm doing all this razzmatazz testing, limb symmetry and the number of touches and reaction time, is it really accurate? Is it really reliable?
Yeah.
Is it really valid? So that's what we're doing. We should be finished that in the next month. And then we're going to be submitting those papers to APTA. And then I've got a pretty decent GA right now. And then she's helping me collect some of the data, and then we're going to start writing those up. But they're the first ones that will ever be on neurocognitive reactive testing, closed chain or open chain, upper extremity using the Blazepods.
Looking for a way to improve sport-specific training with your athletes? Then you have to check out Blazepods. Blazepods is a neurocognitive reaction training intervention that can be incorporated into your sessions for patients throughout the treatment spectrum. Visit blazepod.com, enter code EVERYTHINGPT at checkout, and save 15% off your order today. Hey, all you rehab specialists out there, do you have an isokinetic dynamometer just sitting around your clinic not being used? Little known fact, isokinetic machines that aren't used regularly are at higher risk for bouts of sadness. Help your machine out and take CSMI's newest CEU course, Isokinetics 101 online, created by me, Daniel Bodkin, and learn how to use all the exercise and testing applications available on your machine. With new and exciting rehab techniques in your toolbox, your sad isokinetic machine can become an active member of the rehab team again and regain its happiness. Isokinetics 101 online by CSMI has been approved for 8 credit hours for athletic trainers, physical therapists, and physical therapy assistants. Contact your state board for details on specific requirements. This course is available at humacnorm.com/courses/isokinetics-101.
That's funny. That's awesome, George. And
That's what I'm doing right now. Right now, by the way, I have 7 IRBs going.
oh, gee, George, you're supposed to be slowing down, not speeding up with this stuff, George.
As I said, I'm the most selfish person you'll ever meet. I want to know those answers. We have one on BFR.
Yeah. That's
Everybody's
awesome.
doing that. There's only about a dozen studies on the upper extremity. So what we did is we put the BFR on the side. We had a control group, experimental group. We trained them and, progressed them and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I was looking at is not only is there proximal overflow to the cup, because that's what we tested beforehand and after. But my main question was, if I train with BFR on the right side, is there contralateral or physiologic overflow to the non-trained side? So we finished that study. We're crunching the numbers. It's getting the end of the semester here, this last one. We're crunching everything. So we did that. We've done some things with manual therapy. We have the 2 Blazepod things going. We finished a study where we compared a PRO. So that you guys are familiar with the DASH, the disability.
Yes,
So the PRO DASH. We compared that against the seated shot put. Because again, there's no other studies that have actually compared upper extremity functional testing with PROs. And that's in review. It should be almost should be in press soon. So, but at any rate, they're just some of the things we've done this year.
Yeah. So Daniel at CSM, George was there presenting and brought up, this is going, George. He brought up Blazepods in his one of his lectures, and I think there might have even been some videos with the test too. Yeah, I was there.
That's the study we're doing.
After that, Daniel downstairs in the lobby where Blazepods had their little setup, packed. I mean, just probably 50 people deep, all because of the lecture that George gave.
But I actually used the videos of what we're doing in our testing. Because we did a session on upper extremity testing and then upper extremity rehab. So I showed it for the testing, what we're actually doing, just exactly as I explained. And then I showed some examples of, frankly, you do the same thing for the rehab, or you can. So there's some of the things that we're doing now, and hell, it's still fun. And again, I think it will make a difference though, because as you guys know, when we return people back into sports, only about 50% of the people go back after an ACL. Anywhere, depending on the study, 30 to 40% re-injure. We're doing a shitty job. Last issue, the very last issue of AJSM, American Journal of Sports Medicine, there's an article in there by Moody. What they did is they looked at the NFL. Okay, the best of the best, they can rehab 10 hours a day, over 300 ACLs. Only about 60% got back to playing, and very few lasted more than 3 years.
Wow.
All performance parameters dropped. Everybody cites the one guy from Minnesota, but not everybody is an Adrian Peterson. I mean, he's an exception. But again, that's a really good study. And I'll tell you, when I saw that, it was like, holy shit. What we haven't done is we haven't followed patients up with shoulders as carefully. And that's why most of what I'm interested in now is shoulders. Because again, as you know, Dan, one of the big things in the military is one of the studies we did was we actually took force plates and we did plyometrics on the force plates and had them jump back up onto the boxes. And we actually got Marines from Paris Island to come down, because one of the GA's husbands was a Marine up there. He got his buddies, and they'd do anything, as you know. They do all these drop plyos from these boxes and shit. And we actually published the ground reaction forces was the point. When you're doing plyometrics on the ground, what are the ground reaction forces? And is it harmful, et cetera, to the joints? But at any rate, the point being is, again, when we have different military people, one of the most common problems they have, besides the lower extremity, are unstable shoulders. And yet there's very little information on how to rehab them. What are the criterion-based information we need to really return them back? And, this Blazepod stuff would be to me, the transition from some of our isokinetic testing, from the straight hop testing in the lower extremity, or the closed chain test in the upper extremity. Then we do the Blazepods, lower extremity, upper extremity. And then we go into specificity testing, whatever the sport is, or in this case, if the Marine has to do a certain job where they've got to be reaching up, then we need to replicate that in their testing in the clinic, We can never truly replicate it, but we need to get as close to it as we can. And to me, that's still the missing link in a lot of stuff we're doing. And when you look at the results, they really suck. I mean, everybody looks at the NFL as the best of the best, supposedly the best physicians, the best athletic trainer, the best therapists, best athletes, most motivated athletes. They can rehab all day. Hell, they're paid to rehab. And yet we're getting shitty results with them. Think about that.
Very true.
Think about Joe Average down the block who doesn't have isokinetics, doesn't have Blazepods. What in the world are they doing to their patients? And I don't mean to be cynical. That's why I guess I'm so damn obsessed with doing the research and trying to speak at places like CSM, Matt, so I can make people more aware of this stuff. Because we've got to do a better job as a profession.
Yeah.
Frankly, a lot of that falls on our hands.
Well, people like you, George, have done that, and I have listened through different mediums, just like this podcast here, and passively learning so much to the point that I felt like I needed to go into private practice, and so much to the point where I felt like I needed to invest in an isokinetic machine because I thought it was that important to get people back to sport and to set us apart too. And I know Daniel's got a lot of experience with isokinetics too. I'm just kind of getting my feet wet at this point in it.
I think you need one. Back in lacrosse, as I said, we have 2 isokinetic devices. And frankly, at one point we had 3. Dan, I'm not sure if you're even familiar with the Linnea.
I'm not.
You ever heard of that? We actually published a reliability study on that. It was basically developed by the Lido company. You're familiar with them?
Yes, sir.
They existed way back when, the Kincom, Lido, Biodex, Cybex, and all that. Well, Lido actually developed what they called a Linnea. And it was basically a closed kinetic chain isokinetic device where you did a semi-sitting like a leg press, and you could press the pedals and it would record the data isokinetically. Then you could do it in a reciprocal manner and it would record the data individually. And then the neatest thing about it is you did it in a semi-sitting position to do the testing. Then you could flip the whole device up and actually do a squat test isokinetically. It was the neatest piece of equipment I've ever used in my lifetime. And we actually published an article, the reliability of it, way back in JOSPT. Golly, I don't even know when, but you can even just Google Linnea, L-I-N-E-A, and it will come up in PubMed. But at any rate, the point I'm leading up to is we're really missing the boat if we're not using isokinetics. I still say that. I said that 40 some years ago when I started. First one I ever saw was in 1974 in NYU when I was actually in school. And it was, what the heck is that thing? It had hot patch covers hanging on the back of it and all that. So what is that thing? And then I went to Kessler Rehab, which is a rehab center, but they had a Cybex at that time. And what was really interesting is there was a guy there who was sort of into it, and he did some in-services for the students. And that day I was hooked when I saw that. I actually, patients stopped, everybody left. George stayed there for hours on end playing with that goddamn thing. I had strips of paper miles long. It was unbelievable.
The raw data.
And that's why I wear glasses now. I had to analyze all those damn cards, those data sheets by hand.
Wow.
So,
well, I learned isokinetics from my mentor, John Hisimoto, down in Tampa. And when a lot of clinicians stopped using isokinetics in the 90s, he continued to work with companies like Kincom and CSMI and helping develop them. And the technology has come up. And I'd say if there was one overreaching message of my teaching or my course is that they're capable of doing so much more now than they were even 15, 20 years ago, all the way from all the various isometric applications, the eccentric focused isokinetic loading, starting at slow velocities and working your way faster. All the different isotonic, the dynamic visual feedback, proprioceptive techniques, power training, and then you have different testing modalities. You got the isokinetic test, the standard test, but John taught me, and he's a big promoter of the concentric eccentric. That way we can see what's happening to that eccentric quadricep.
Functional ratio.
Absolutely. And they're just, people will look at an old textbook and it's pretty much written by you. Even if it wasn't directly written by you, it's based on your work.
Yeah.
And a lot of it hasn't been updated since. And so that's what I try to push is like, look, you can use these things all the way from day one post-op all the way to return to sport. There's so many applications available on them now.
Oh, I agree. We did an interesting study. You mentioned looking at some of the forces. We did a study and we presented it at APTA. Didn't go into publishing because it was underpowered, but we did a force control accuracy. So we used the dynamometer and we had the patients, they had to push up to a certain force to maintain it. So force steadiness is one of the things that you can use. So as you said, there's so many things that you can do with it. What is interesting too, by the way, and this is, I don't know if it's really, I don't think it's confidential at this point, but Biodex was bought by another company. And in the interim time, what we were doing is Biodex in conjunction with NASA was making a dedicated knee testing isokinetic device. Because as you know, the majority of isokinetics is done on the knee.
Yes, sir.
So NASA had one and they still have it and probably planning to take it up into space for both testing and training. We actually had one, and what we did is we did the reliability testing on the prototype, and then we did the validity testing, comparing the results, I call it the baby Biodex, to the big Biodex for validity. And that actually just got published in a real kind of an engineering type of journal. It's kind of cerebral stuff, a lot of math in it. My Brian Riemann, my partner, did most of that, but we actually did all the testing. And the neatest thing about it is the whole concept was, besides NASA and taking it up into space, was to have a portable device that you could actually take out, for example, in the nursing homes and test people in a nursing home. And we actually did that. I wasn't there for that session, but they actually took it out to one of the nursing homes and did isokinetic knee flexion extension testing bilateral for the all the older folks in the thing. They tested a lady who was 103 years old.
Wow.
That's the oldest I've ever heard. Yeah. Yeah. But she was able to sit there and push it up and down. So it was a dedicated knee machine. But then when Biodex got bought out, they took some of the software stuff. So we have the hardware. We've got the damn dynamometer with the seat and the whole thing, but we don't have the software to run it. So that's unfortunate because there was so much potential for that. As I said, just taking it out into nursing homes and into different places like that, because they all get shortchanged, as we all know. But
For
there's
sure.
so, as you know, Dan, there's so much about isokinetics. I've often thought, and Brian and I, we published an article or a book chapter in Dr. Frank Noyes' book, kind of a lot of traditional stuff, but we updated some of the stuff on isokinetics. I don't know if you ever saw that. You guys need to send me your emails. I have Matt's,
sir.
but I don't think I have yours, Dan. Or yeah, I do have it here. I can send it. I'll send you copies of the isokinetic chapter we wrote. But what I'm leading up to, Brian and I have often talked, because Brian has actually started doing some part-time work for Biodex, going out and doing some of the in-services, because he's really cerebral shit. He takes, instead of taking the data from the computer, he basically taps into the back of the computer and takes the direct signals and stuff like that. I mean, this guy's fanatical about that. Yeah, brilliant. He's a brilliant biomechanist. But what I'm also leading up to is we've talked about actually writing something and updating stuff on isokinetics. My concern is, again, that's a big project. And as you know, with so many barriers now, cost is the big one you hear. And frankly, people don't know how to use it. They don't understand all the implications. They could use it for almost every damn patient in the clinic in different ways. That I just don't think there'd be a big readership for it. That's my concern as to why we haven't invested, hours and hours and frankly, probably years into doing something to update it. So what I'm leading up to is perhaps you should get yourself and John,
Mhm.
you guys should even maybe like a paperback or something like that. What's the current state of the art of isokinetics? And then, or something, kind of get a jazzy title. Are you guys familiar with the journal Isokinetics and Exercise Science?
Yes, sir.
I started that. I don't know if you knew that.
George.
Yeah, started JOSPT, started Isokinetics and Exercise Science, and then started Sports Health. But the point is, we wanted a dedicated journal to isokinetics, but then we realized, wait a minute, and this was even 30 years ago. We said, not everybody's interested in isokinetics. They don't have it. They don't have the equipment. That's why we put isokinetics and exercise science to expand it. So that's what I'm saying to you, because what you're saying is using isotonics, using the torque steadiness type of rehab testing. There's so many things that can be done using the functional ratio.
I love combining it with blood flow. There's
There you go.
4 or 5 different BFR applications you can use on the machine.
Yeah,
that's what I
great.
mean.
So again, you guys are vested in it. You're, working with that directly every day. So that's something that maybe you and John should be thinking about. Maybe, not a big old textbook, but kind of a paperback with like a manual updating, hey, this is the state of using isokinetics and exercise science or something of that nature, and bringing into those things, bringing in the, the concentric, eccentric functional ratios, looking at the torque steadiness, looking at how do you analyze some of this data, using BFR as part of it. I mean, all those different things. I mean, there's a need for that. That's why the conversation we're having right now. I mean, there's a need for that stuff because people don't know what you know. And most people have never been born and raised with it and haven't come up with it. And they don't realize all the potential that it has to offer. So shit through CSMI. I mean, you guys started and you would like, I'd be happy to co-author some of it with you. I mean, because I'm going to learn. As I said, selfishly, man, anything that I can learn from, I'm in. So.
Well, George, we're running a little bit short on time here, but I want to make sure we get through just one more question for you.
Sure.
You've seen almost 50 years of physical therapy, and gosh, there's been a lot of change, I'm sure. Where do you think the field is going to go in the next 50 years? What are some things you might want to see come back or leave?
What I guess you guys didn't pick up or didn't know is I actually started in athletic training. So I was 4 years as a student, a year as a GA, and a head athletic trainer before I ever became a PT. So this is actually year 58 in sports medicine. It's only been 48 in PT. Okay. So, but I did, and I threw the Marine Corps in between there. But I'm hoping the most important things I think that we can do as a profession, boy, this is not going to go over well.
Oh,
that's what we're all about.
Yeah, I want the real truth here, George.
Okay, to get away from so much of the passive intervention stuff and focus on exercise-centric rehab. Function is movement.
Yep.
Movement requires exercise to enhance it.
Yeah.
So that's one trend. Recently in the PT Journal, it was a good article. And what they basically did is they did a strength and conditioning test. You only had to get a 70 on that. And all PTs every day, what do? They prescribe exercises. So they gave a strength and conditioning test to PTs and PT students. They only had to pass with a 70. And this was just published this past year. And 60% of students failed it. And I think it was 45% of physical therapists failed it.
Wow.
So the point is, every day we're prescribing exercise. I don't know if you guys are familiar with APTA Choosing Wisely, where they recommend certain things that we don't do a good job with.
Mhm.
One of them is we underdose our patients. That's our own profession telling us we underdose our patients with exercise. So to me, Matt and Dan, I think I would like to see the emphasis going on to better, I guess, program design with developing really appropriate exercise programs. There's several other studies that show also that when you read the literature, very few published articles really give you the nuts and bolts of really what's happening.
Yeah.
And there's lack of detail. So I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more criterion-based approaches to returning people back to ADLs,
Mhm.
to work, to play, to sports. Things like, well, you start with all your PROs, you start with your impairment measurements, you start with your strength tests, power tests, endurance, muscle testing. Then you go to basic functional, generic functional tests. Then you go into higher level specific tests like the Blazepods stuff as an example. Finally, you get into the sport specific or ergonomic specific or ADL specific functional tests and do a better job trying to replicate things in a clinic. We can never fully replicate it. That's a given, full disclosure.
Yeah.
But we need to do a better job trying to get closer to what the heck they're doing.
Yeah.
As I said, the best example of that, every test in the Berne consensus on upper extremity functional testing is a proactive test. None of those, none are reality-based tests to get somebody back to sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're the trends that I would like to see. PTs do a better job with true exercise prescriptions, and then do a better job with criterion-based information to return people back to activities safely and hopefully with a decrease in the incidence of injuries. We haven't done that yet.
I would agree with you, George. Daniel, I don't want to speak for you. I think Daniel and I are pretty heavy into exercise too, and building people's capacity. I feel like that's what we do really well as a group of physical therapists. I feel like we're exercises and expert. I'm sorry, we're experts in exercise.
We should be.
We should be, yeah. And you shedding light on that
research doesn't. You guys need to look that article up.
Yeah, no doubt. But I think until our group of collectively, the APTA of the group of physical therapists feels that and can get some cohesiveness and agreement on that, I think we're just going to be arguing amongst one another too. And I don't think we're going to see those necessary changes to really grow and push our field the direction.
Agree. But also the other thing, what you don't know what you don't know. But now with an article published in our own PT journal that says that PTs are failing and student PTs are failing a basic strength and conditioning test. And yet every day we're prescribing exercises.
Yeah. No, really
there's a disconnect there. So I agree that we can be, I think, the best there are at doing that. But right now, the literature doesn't support it. Yeah. So that's why I said that's one of the things that I would like to see is doing a better job in that area.
Yeah.
George Davies, thank you so much. It was very insightful.
And fun. But thank you guys for the kind invitation. It was fun. And hopefully we all learned a lot from each other. So,
ladies and gentlemen, George Davies never stops, never sleeps either. George, thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. And we will catch you guys next week. Thanks, everybody.